Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Ryan Grimm is here for Crystal Ball. Ryan, it's great to see you, my friend.
All these crestfallen faces.
No, there's no crestfallen faces. What are you talking about? Everyone was very excited about the girls' show. We have to make sure that we supplant them with the boys' show. So let's go ahead and get those comments as positive as they were for the girls' show for the bro show. So we got a lot of good stuff in the show today. We got Ukraine. We're going to be talking about negotiations. We got SCOTUS. There's two big cases. The CFPB, Ryan, you were very involved in covering that at the time. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about student loan, which is up before the court. Biden administration in a real bind right now because they have to both argue the pandemic is over, but also that it's not before the court, so that'll be fun. Fox News, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, who's getting more Fox News treatment? Trump is very pissed off at the way that Fox has been handling it so far. I know there's a lot of interest, Crystal, I had to cover this for her, the Brett Favre case versus Pat McAfee. This guy has got to be one of the most arrogant, I'll save my words for that. But anyway, he officially served Pat McAfee in the case, and he's making some outrageous legal threats. I really want to see Brett Favre go down like this now that he's conducting himself. And then finally, Nina Turner just absolutely stunning a CNN panel in her comments on East Palestine. But let's start with Ukraine. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. General Mark Milley making some crazy comments on the one-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, being the senior-most military official of the U.S. government, saying that there is no way this thing ends without negotiation. Let's take a listen to that.
How do we move toward an endgame? How do we move toward a negotiated peace?
Well, I think that's up for the Ukrainians to decide that. So what is acceptable to Ukraine, that's territory intact, whatever that answer is going to be.
Is it militarily possible for us to get Russians, for the Ukrainians to get every Russian troop out of their country and Crimea?
I don't think it's militarily possible for the Russians to achieve their initial strategic objectives, political objectives, by military means. I don't think that's possible anymore. On the flip side, the Ukrainians, I think for this year, it would be very, very difficult, not impossible, but very, very difficult for the Ukrainians to achieve their political objectives. And their stated political objective is for every single Russian to leave every single inch of Ukrainian territory. I think that's a very high bar. I think from a military standpoint only, that'd be extraordinarily difficult to achieve militarily this year.
So he's choosing his words there very carefully, Ryan. And this actually comes on the heels of a New York Times report. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen, guys, flagged by Aaron Mate. From this report, they say, quote, around the same time, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, argued in internal meetings Ukraine was unlikely to make substantially greater battlefield gains and should move to the bargaining table. Quote, the White House quickly squelched such talk. This actually happened. Several leaks came out from the Joint Chiefs at the time about how he was saying, look, guys, he's like, I understand, all this $50 billion. He's also been, as I understand it, one of the heads of leaking to the New York Times and others the fact that the Ukrainians are very likely to expend all of their battlefield aid by sometime this summer, and that is very likely going to be the end of the package. What'd you make of his comments? Probably the most pro-negotiating comments, ironically, coming from the military.
Yeah, and it's well said that he was choosing his words wisely, and you could see that he had been cracked down on a little bit. He had made some comments publicly that were similar to those back in the fall. It's nice to see from the New York Times that he was saying those internally. Not so nice to see that they're just squelching that. Who else made comments like that at the time? Barack Obama, if you remember.
I do.
Remember the Progressive Caucus came out with that letter that they immediately said, never mind. Sorry.
Yes.
Did we say that? No, we retract that letter.
Yeah.
Ben Rhodes, over the pod. Once you have the pod save crew saying like, maybe this is something we ought to think about, it becomes part of the conversation, which they very quickly squelched. So here he is back again saying like, look, and he's setting up a real logical conundrum for people here. Because the people who say, look, it's up to Ukraine, and it's all about sovereignty, and we need to support Ukrainian sovereignty until the Ukraine says that they have fought to every last man, woman, and child. If Milley is saying that that is not possible, then what are you advocating for? You're advocating just to keep arming Ukraine indefinitely, which is a forever war. And if that's your position, then make it.
Yeah, you should say it.
That's fine. Right. And maybe because of Russia's aggression, maybe that is an appropriate position.
A lot of people will take that position.
A lot of people will take it.
Yeah.
But take that position.
Yes.
Say that we're in this forever. Now, Milley says over the next year, but if you would have pressed him on that, it's not obvious what conditions change that makes Crimea attainable for the Ukrainian military, other than European boots in there, U.S. boots in there. Because we're already giving roughly what our manufacturing capacity can send there So it's not like we're going to necessarily expand our manufacturing capacity just to finance a takeover of Crimea. So that raises a real question. What are you for at this point?
Well, it's interesting too, because what you can see is that, and what we've pointed here to a lot of the show is, let's remember, Ukraine is not just the West and Russia and Ukraine. It's also a global war in terms of the support, in terms of Russia, China now coming out with its peace proposal, which effectively just freezes the battle lines that are in place. Ukraine saying that's a complete non-starter. The West saying it's a joke. It's supposed to help Putin. But then at the flip side of that, you have Brazil, President Lula coming here to Washington and be like, no, I'm not going to send a single a piece of military equipment to Ukraine. India, which they talk about actually quite a bit in the piece, is that much of the strategic negotiation talk, both Russia, Ukraine, and the West, is not aimed at each other. It's aimed at the rest of the world. Everybody wants to try and convince the rest of the world that they're going to try and bring this thing to the end. The Indians have made the strategic calculus. They're like, look, as long as we're going to get cheap oil, we're going to get it. We're like, we don't really care what's happening here. Russia, yeah, we would prefer that you hadn't invaded Ukraine, but if we're going to buy it at a discount, we have 1-point-something billion people that we have to feed, and we have to keep going in a growing economy. We're just going to take it. The Chinese, on the other hand, are in a different conundrum. So initially, they were caught off the guard, right? They were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this actually happened. Then they were playing some rhetorical games, saying putting Putin aside, saying that we weren't very happy about what happened. Now, the U.S. military is on high alert, saying that it looks like lethal aid is about to start going from Beijing to Russia. Not only that, Russia very likely to start beginning even more strategic purchases from China in order to boost the Russian economy and keep it sanction-proof. By all accounts, the sanctions have been a total mixed bag, right? The Russian economy certainly has contracted, but not even close to the level of what we expected a financial nuclear bomb to do to a foreign country. It's actually really exposed what it means to have trade, and whenever you don't have total 100% control over global trade, well, countries can't exist, especially when they have hard assets like oil. So I think much of this, General Milley is looking at this, seeing the increase in military aid from China, seeing the continued situation where India is going to backstop, at least some certain extent, the Russian economy, and he's like, I don't see a way that the industrial output of Russia is going to end anytime soon. And like you said, I don't see a way that without 100% depleting our stockpiles and moving us to almost a total war manufacturing trajectory, that we could supply them with the sheer amount of ammunition that they need. I mean, I don't think people really understand what it means to eat up $50 billion in weapons in just 6 months by the U.S. military's estimates. Well, how else is this thing going to end?
And there was a nice column in the New York Times by some guest author that made a parallel to the Korean War that I thought was apt, and something I had been thinking about previously, in the sense that in 1951, the war had kind of reached a stalemate, where they're going kind of back and forth. And the world allowed that war to continue for another couple years. Stalin had his own reasons. He said it was giving the Chinese like some training and fighting, and it was draining the West and making them look weak. It was hurting Truman back home, which it was actually hurting Truman back home. So I said, let's drag this out. And the U.S., once the U.S. is in a war, like they're in that war. Like you really have to drag them out of there. And so 2 years later, it ends basically on the exact same terms that it would have ended in 1951, but at the cost of tens of thousands of lives. And so unless you can envision some path where the world is going to look fundamentally different than it does today, then what are you sacrificing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives over the next several years for? Rather than, as Milley said, get lucky and touch wood. I had never heard that phrase before. It's like, he's like, we can get the diplomats in the wood, they can, in the room, they can touch the wood. And I'm like, oh, listen, okay, all right.
Well, I mean, look, it's going to be difficult. Unfortunately, I don't think it's possible. I mean, the Ukrainians now, I mean, to their credit, let's give them the credit where they do. They fought tremendously well. They have they have one of the most homogenous, populations that are left inside of Ukraine who are absolutely willing to fight for every scrap, for every inch. Up to them to when they want to go to the negotiation table. But as I've always said, it's also up to us to how much we want to backstop them. To what extent. Let's not forget, the Ukrainian war effort ends tomorrow without U.S. military aid. They could try and subsist on the European aid, but given the sheer amount of numbers, it's not a joke. It's a joke compared to what the U.S. has provided them. We're basically the sole determiners of how the conflict is going to go. And according to the Washington Post, others who have been getting deep leaks from inside the administration, the word is from the Biden admin, they're like, look, guys, this is it. This is probably the last large age package. I'm personally a little bit skeptical of this because I was thinking about Afghanistan and even about Vietnam. Afghanistan, everybody wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan. Then we did it, and it turned out to be politically unpopular because people have some crazy idea that withdrawing from a war is apparently very easy. Vietnam is a great example. Nixon was elected in 1968 on the pledge to try and withdraw from Vietnam. Actually, what he ends up doing is pursuing the peace with honor two-pronged strategy, actually ends up escalating the war to try to de-escalate the war. Here's the truth, people. That was very popular. You know, for all of the student protests over the bombing of Cambodia, most people did want, quote, peace with honor without Vietnam, even though a Saigon-type exit was probably inevitable from literally day one. 1965, whenever the first U.S. military advisors go over, or 1968, when the first hundreds of thousands of troops go over there.
I'd say on the flip side, though, it happened in July of 21. Was it even remotely an issue in the 22 midterms? Not
wrong.
And I think there's something skeezy about even talking about war and lives lost in those political terms. But unfortunately, it is determinative of policy.
Right.
And so it is worth pointing out that you actually can leave a 20-year war in an off year and then and it be a debacle in the departure, and then a year and a half later, when voters go to the polls, they're like, "Oh yeah, Afghanistan. We didn't like the way we ended, but there was not a single person who ran on the idea that we should actually go back into Afghanistan."
That's an important point. And actually, I did a monologue at the time. People can go back and watch it about how Gerald Ford's approval rating actually went up after Saigon. So, you know, it's one of those where you never really know. But he did end up losing the election, so I don't know.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.